Hi there, my name is Sam Shahi and I'm a composer based in Toronto, Canada. This video is part 2 of a series exploring minimalism in the world of classical music. If you haven't done so already, make sure to watch the first video where we talk about the basics of minimalism, its background, and also who took it off the ground. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Last week we talked about how the rise of avant-garde and expressionism had alienated the audiences and music lovers in the 60s. And then we talked about how composers such as Terry Riley and Lamont Young began fusing freer performance practices such as improvisation and chants into their writing. From the heart of that, three towering musical figures emerged in the world of Western classical music, all American and all hating the label of minimalism, literally. Let's talk about number one. Steve Reich. A native New Yorker and also one of the most important and towering figures in the world of Western classical music in the 20th century, Reich had no interest in lofty and convoluted processes in creating music, and instead wanted to connect directly to the human spirit. We quoted him last week, but I love this so much that I'm going to use it again. What I'm interested in is a compositional process and a sounding music that are one and the same thing. And that's exactly what he did. Two of his most important contributions to the world of music are his use of looping and phasing. Looping is a straightforward one. A musical idea repeating, whether by acoustic or electronic means. Looping can be done in either strict forms, such as the amount of time or the number of repeats, or it can be done in a more free fashion. It usually serves as a counter motif to another musical event that is happening and gradually changing in the same acoustic space. Phasing, on the other hand, whether produced by electronic or acoustic means, is a process where two simultaneous musical ideas gradually fall out of sync, creating a delay or a riddling effect. This riddling effect goes on until they can interlock at a different metric point. Here's an example of his piano phases. In this case, one piano line is at a slightly slower tempo, causing it to gradually fall out of sync with the first one, creating a riddling or even a delay effect until it lands on the next 16th note and locks in. Another great example of phasing is his very famous clapping music. In this piece, two lines are playing an identical rhythm. After every 8 repeats, the bottom part shifts by 1/8 notes. After 12 repeats, we land on the very first rendition. There are countless renditions of this piece, but here are a few. Or here's the man himself. Or here's a really cool one on a snare drum. And not to toot my own horn, but here's what I did. Before we can wrap up Mr. Reich, we must listen to at least 2 more of his works that are very, very important. Different Trains, written in 1988, which uses repeated speech as a way of creating melodic motifs. This powerful and personal work for string quartet and electronics is a reflection on his childhood and his train journeys between New York and Los Angeles visiting his parents, who had separated.
From Chicago to New York. From Chicago. From Chicago. From Chicago to New York. From Chicago to New York.
And finally, It's Gonna Rain, that again uses a brief electronic excerpt and via looping creates magnificent sub-rhythmic renditions of it.
It's gonna rain, it's gonna rain, it's gonna, 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 it's gonna,
Okay, so that wraps up Mr. Reich. Although there's much more to be said about him and his music, but we need to move on. And now on to our next composer, the bad boy of minimalism, Philip Glass. Isn't that amazing? Philip Glass is single-handedly responsible for bringing the 20th century classical music to the realm of the public ear with his film scores and his worldwide touring with his ensemble. Another native New Yorker, initially he struggled quite a bit in his career and had to do menial jobs to make ends meet. Later on he found that doing those menial jobs actually kept his mind free so he could create more. He studied in very prestigious institutions such as the Peabody and Juilliard, and with celebrated composers such as Darius Milhaud and also Vincent Persichetti. The National Endowments for the Arts has said this about Glass. He's the first composer to win a wide, multi-generational audience in the opera house, the concert hall, the dance world, in film, and in popular music. And that is exactly what he did in the world of classical music. Just to have fun, let's look at another rampant criticism of minimalism. Here's Michael White of the Daily Telegraph describing Glass's Violin Concerto No. 2 as being as rewarding as chewing gum that's lost its flavor. This new concerto is unmitigated trash. The usual strung-out sequences of arpeggiated banality, driven by the rise and fall of fast-moving but still leaden triplets, and vacuously formulaic. Glass is nothing, though he presumably deludes himself into thinking that he does. Hence the preponderance of slow, reflective solo writing in this piece, which assumes there's something to reflect on. Wow. Glass's writings in his early career in the 60s and 70s are directly influenced to the music he was studying, the serialism of Anton Webern and the expressionism of Pierre Boulez. However, while in Paris, he found himself quite enamored with the theater and the film scene. He even ended up collaborating with some local artists at the time. After coming back to New York, he attended a performance of Steve Reich's Piano Phases, which made a rather permanent and important mark on him and his music. It essentially led his music in a totally different direction. Much like his predecessor composers in the world of minimalism, he was also an avid performer of both his music and others. For this reason, he had created an ensemble that performed his music and toured around the world. Some of his most important works include Music in 12 Parts, his 3.5-hour long opera, Einstein on the Beach, which the Washington Post has called one of the seminal artworks of the century.
If you see any of those baggy pants.
And then some of his film music, such as The Hours, which landed him an Oscar nomination. While Glass's music lacks the technical prowess of Reich and is much less controlled in terms of content and development, it emanates a powerful and rather immediate impact onto the listener. His early works are filled with passion and exploration, while his later works deal with the qualms of philosophy, life, and politics. He remains to be an untamed and polarizing figure with his music. He's also one of the first composers to seriously explore including synthesizers and other instruments associated mostly with the popular styles in the serious musical setting. I will close with a quote from his memoir that I absolutely love. "If you don't know what to do, there's actually a chance of doing something new." Very true, Mr. Glass. Very true indeed. And now our last composer. No other than the very John Adams. A native of Boston, Massachusetts, Adams is a heavily decorated and celebrated composer. He has won a Pulitzer Prize, 5 Grammys, among many, many more. Adams' contributions to the world of minimalism was taking it to the orchestral stage. As a skilled conductor, he managed to further penetrate the style into the ears of serious concert goers and compel them to give this aesthetic a chance. His first attempts at minimalism are his early piano works, such as the Phrygian Gaze. His first serious orchestral piece that has captured the imagination of many is his bombastic Short Ride in the Fast Machine in 1986. Note the incredibly detailed orchestration, attention to timbre, and also the expansion of the sonic space in the first 30 seconds alone. He's written many more orchestral pieces, most notably the Harmony Layer on the Transmigration of Souls, Shaker Loops, and the Grand Piano Music. though since the early 2000s he somewhat departed from using minimalism as his only tool in writing, one can still hear the influence of minimalism even in his later works. He's in a way a transitional figure in the world of minimalism, the composer who took off with the philosophy and flew away. His operatic work is also quite impressive, and he's considered one of the most important opera composers of the century, with works such as Dr. Atomic and Nixon in China.
Look at that thing, it won't be long. Look at that thing, that was his tongue. It won't be long.
His take on minimalism is much more romantic than his other two colleagues in New York. His music explores more dynamic extremes and blends in development with repetition and has a very directional narrative, meaning that the music is much more inherently programmatic. Adams is a very humble man and a slightly nervous public speaker. He's brilliantly candid about the struggles of having a creative life. I had a chance to meet him in one of his residencies in Toronto, and I could not believe how real and down to earth he was. I absolutely love him. And with that, we come to the end of this episode. But be sure to tune in next week when we'll be discussing post-minimal composers. Some of these names you will not believe. And like always, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you want to be notified about my future uploads. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you next time.